Hello, my name is Julian Grenier. I'm the practitioner who was asked by the DfE to lead on the update to development matters, and I've also been part of the advisory group that has overseen the changes to the EYFS for 2021. However, this video comes from a group of colleagues who've put it together independently and without charge for a simple reason. We are really passionate about making a success of the revised EYFS for all of our children and supporting the whole system and all of our schools. I'm the first serving practitioner who's worked on development matters in this way for the DfE. I'm head teacher of Sheringham Nursery School and Children's Centre in Newham, East London, and also director of the East London Research School. However, this video has been made independently from teachers for teachers. So let's spend a little bit of time together thinking about the revised EYFS and the new development matters. So in this session with colleagues, I'm going to be covering the following: what's new, how we can make sure that we use the revised EYFS and development matters to promote fairer life chances. What about curriculum and assessment, which have caused so many practitioners and teachers to raise questions about the new EYFS? Inclusion, how can we make sure that every child benefits and thrives? Making changes, how do we stop feeling that sense of panic when we see there's a new set of documentation from the DfE and make the right changes for our children? We're going to hear from some of the early adopters who will be telling us firsthand about their experience of working with the revised EYFS, and then there'll be some concluding thoughts and some next steps. Before I move on, two thank yous. First of all, to all of the teachers and practitioners who've freely shared their work to make this video possible. A really big thank you to all of you. And secondly, a big thank you to everyone who's watching this briefing, because I know that you will have had a really tough year with unprecedented ups and downs, and you will have done amazing things for the young children that you're working with. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you've done for children this year. And I hope this briefing will help you to feel more confident about the year ahead. So what is new in the revised EYFS? Here's just some headlines. This is not a comprehensive rundown of all of the changes. First of all, we have the new early learning goals, we have new educational programs, and the requirement to promote oral health in the EYFS statutory framework. Just to say a few things about them. The ELGs have been written to be clearer and more straightforward to assess, and that's intended to reduce workload. The educational programs give us a thumbnail guide to children's learning and development across the EYFS, and it's important to know what's there. The requirement to promote oral health is an additional requirement around health promotion, and one that I'm particularly passionate about because so many of the children that I work with have poor oral health, and by introducing programs to encourage toothbrushing, we've really seen that improve. In development matters, the document itself is significantly shorter than its predecessor version, and it's also more readable. So you can sit down and read the updated development matters in about 90 minutes, which is something I'd encourage you to do to get a sense of the whole picture of what the guidance is saying. But within that shorter length, there's actually more focus on children's early communication. And the reasons for that are clear. We're absolutely certain that children's early communication is fundamental to their thinking, to their learning, to their play, to children being able to talk about their feelings and to solve conflicts. And one of the strongest associations we know in education is that the richer a child's vocabulary is at 5, the better they will do in their schooling. So early communication is central to the updated development matters, and there's more guidance on it. There's also a strong focus throughout both the EYFS and development matters on reducing workload. We know that practitioners have got tied up with a lot of workload, some of which hasn't actually benefited the learning of the children that we're working with. There's specific guidance for the reception year, which teachers and leaders asked for. Finally, on this list, but for me, most importantly, there's a particular focus on narrowing the gap and promoting more equal life chances for children. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, Lorna Jackson and Natasha St. Rose from Maryland Primary School.
Hello, I'm Lorna Jackson, head teacher at Maryland Primary School.
Hi, I'm Natasha St. Rose. I'm an early years and Key Stage 1 teacher at Maryland.
We're leading on a project called Education for Change, E4C for short, supporting schools to challenge racism through conversation and curriculum. And we're here to talk to you about promoting racial equality in the early years.
A good starting point is to look at current data from the Education in England Annual Report 2020. It looks at the size of the attainment gap of different ethnic groups relative to white British children at various ages in 2019. The gap is measured between the ethnic groups in months. You can see at the end of early years, the data shows that 3 groups, Indian, white Irish and Chinese children, were performing ahead of white British and continue to do so until the end of secondary. Chinese children are almost 2 years ahead, and the Indian children are 14 months ahead by the end of secondary education. Why do you think this is? The data also shows that all the other groups began with a lower starting point than the white British group and remained behind until the end of their secondary education. For example, the Gypsy Roma group began early years 8.1 months behind white British and then left secondary school 34 months behind. Why do you think this is? One anomaly to the trend is the Bangladeshi group, who began early years 2.2 months behind, but then by the end of secondary, they'd not only caught up, but ended up almost 5 months ahead of white British. The 2 groups that showed the biggest decline from starting points to the end of secondary are mixed white and black Caribbean and black Caribbean. Interestingly, black Caribbean started with a gap of 2 months behind, which widened to 11-month gap behind. Why do you think this is?
There's much guidance on how to ensure adequate provision is made for disability and gender. Could the same be said for race? Race is a protected characteristic under law, so we have a statutory and moral duty to ensure early years settings support racial equality in their practice. The 2010 Equality Act requires settings to make reasonable adjustments to ensure that a person with a protected characteristic, such as race, is not at a disadvantage. The data from the previous slide clearly shows that they are at a disadvantage. All schools and nurseries must comply with the Act and public sector duty, whether the setting is maintained, voluntary or private, including childminders. There is a legal requirement for establishments to publish measurable equality objectives, for instance, on their website, which should be updated every 4 years. Settings are required to have due regard to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment, and victimization, to advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations. Reviewing the equality objectives and statements is the first action early years leaders should do when addressing racial inequality.
Following on from our duty to reduce inequality, practitioners need to be conscious of unconscious racial bias. This is achieved through ensuring all groups are represented in everything we do and provide. That could be learning environments, events, curriculums, learning resources. We need to ensure that settings must be well resourced with exciting and engaging activities for every child to access. However, they could be discriminating unknowingly through unconscious bias in their approach to their teaching, support, and interaction. For example, a nursery leader did not realise that when she was speaking to a Bangladeshi parent, she spoke in a much louder and harsher tone compared to other parents. But when she spoke to other EAL parents, white Eastern European, she didn't realise that she was using a positive and calm voice. Another true example is this extract from a letter written by Black parents to a nursery leader. The distraught parents wrote, "We are quite desperate to find resources to help our son with a situation in school that has arisen as a result of his skin colour. My son has been bullied because of his skin colour since reception. He was told by a group of boys that they did not play with brown people. Another child said that he was smelly, and this continued right through year 1 into year 2, where the other children there would also say he was smelly. He was never actively included in any friendship groups and often spent lunchtime asleep on the buddy bench." This highlights that children practice racism from a very early age. Clearly, the ethos and culture in that school has not addressed racial inequality and discrimination, as the parents were forced to write that heart-wrenching letter. Children are actually very good at recognising difference and at talking about it. It is the adults that find it difficult. Unconscious bias can be unintentionally exposed to a child. However, children can be very astute and observant about their environment and their trusted adults' reactions to situations or people. Therefore, we need to be as observant as to how children interact with each other or play with non-familiar resources as we do for any other reason. Data shows that as early as 6 months of age, a baby's brain can notice race-based differences. By ages 2 to 4, children can internalise racial bias, and by the age of 12, many children become set in their beliefs.
Practitioners need to be conscious of unconscious bias in children's play. It is not a problem that children notice differences, but it is a problem that some differences can be considered as a negative. An example of this is when young children at a party were playing with superhero figures, and one child was observed sorting the characters into baddies and goodies. He placed all the black figures into the baddie pile and all the white figures into the goodie pile. It is a matter of perspective, as the baddies could have been the heroes, and in his mind, the goodies. However, so we shouldn't jump to conclusions. However, as observation is key in early years, it is also an essential tool in potentially recognising bias at a very young age. In early years, we allow children to choose their play, but be mindful if any stereotype could be becoming evident. Another key thing in promoting anti-racism in early years is that practitioners should be aware that there is a key difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity is when I see you. Inclusion is when I'm with you. For many years, the education system has been focused on inclusion. It's less comfortable to talk about differences, but all the more important to celebrate difference in order to value the uniqueness of our children. Representation through resources is vital to the sense of belonging for all children. Resources are out there in educational catalogues, but often cost more than those that represent white British. Some of these resources, however, are not completely authentic in terms of cultural dress, hair texture, skin tones and features. However, they attempt to represent diversity and are a step forward in normalising instead of tokenism. We also need to be discerning when choosing diverse resources and look very carefully. The facial features of the black doll are stereotypical, described by children as looking angry, and the white one as being pretty.
How well do you ensure that the books and the stories in your setting reflect and promote diversity? Are they effective tools for anti-racism? Are staff confident and trained to deliver, question and teach in the most effective manner? Education for Change have carefully developed an E4C library of books that boldly promote diversity and difference, not just inclusive storybooks. E4C have devised accompanying notes to support adults in delivering the meaning, the messages and thought-provoking questions. We recommend this as good practice and support for adults who are less confident in talking about racism. Educators must endeavour to quality assure resources dealing with race, or it can be very damaging to our young people regardless of ethnicity. Here is an example. This book, Chocolate Me, which was recommended on a resource list for trainee teachers, is an incredibly negative and divisive children's storybook about race written for 5 to 7-year-olds. However, My Brown Skin, which we showed on the previous slide, has a similar message to Chocolate Me, but with a much more positive voice and graphics. Another book that is appallingly racist is Tiger Pick, which is still on sale on platforms such as Amazon now.
Have courageous conversations with parents too, who may not be comfortable with seeing the focus on physical features. Sit the adult down and read them a story showing them how bravely addressing difference in a positive way will help the self-esteem of many children of colour. However, it will also help the understanding about race to those who are white. And finally, we want to leave you with the most adorable clip of a pair of toddlers overcome with joy when they see each other. This encapsulates the message of racial equality and diversity in early years. We challenge you not to be moved.
My friend, you are just adorable.
And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And we can be contacted at Maryland Primary School if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd very much like to thank Lorna and Natasha for that, and particularly draw on everyone's attention to the fact that the outcomes for children at Maryland Primary School are extremely impressive for disadvantaged children and for all other children. There are very few gaps by the end of the EYFS. And that's an important thing for us to think about, that this is about the best for every child in a context of equality. So let's look at some more detail about 2 areas of the updated development matters that have led to some questions from people: the focus on curriculum and the changed focus on assessment. What do we mean by curriculum when we're thinking about the early years? The curriculum is the top level view we take of everything that we want children to experience, know, and be able to do by the end of their time with us in the early years. And the important thing to note about this is that's going to vary very much from one school to another, because the communities and the children we're working with are so varied. So decisions about curriculum sit quite properly with schools, with teachers, with practitioners. And that's a big reason behind the reduction in the length of development matters. It's to free up more time to make the right decisions for the children we're working with. Now, we have to take a sensible and balanced view. In other words, the curriculum is an important thing to think through, but also we all know that the interests and fascinations, the things children really want to learn and do and play, are crucial to their enjoyment of the early years and their motivation. So we have to maintain a sensible balance. It's also important that the new focus on curriculum doesn't give rise to unnecessary new workload. So there's no expectation within the EYFS or anywhere else that practitioners should be spending lots of time developing complicated documents and maps around the curriculum. Play remains central to children's learning, and it's always important that we focus on our curriculum being inclusive. We want all our children to take part and to thrive. I think what the United Nations say about curriculum in early years is helpful here. They talk about how it can systemize and organize our educational work. We need that big picture if we know what it is that we're trying to support our children to learn, to achieve, to enjoy. Also, having that focus on curriculum can lighten the workload for our teams, because the curriculum gives us guidance on the children's learning activities. And finally, that well-planned, well-sequenced curriculum running alongside all of the child-initiated learning and play helps children to construct meaning, make sense, and connect their different learning experiences together. So what about assessment? There have been a lot of concerns about some of the changes to development matters, and those changes have been made deliberately in order to discourage the culture of excessive data collection and excessive data analysis, which have led to significant workload difficulties in the early years. So the first thing I'd say about assessment in the revised EYFS is focus on what's useful. So for example, if you're establishing children's starting points, that's not a data exercise. That's a focus on what it is we need to know about the new children coming into our setting, about how they communicate with each other, about how they manage their emotions and feelings, how confident they are to move from their parent to the member of staff, their physical development and the extent to which they can take part in and access all of the equipment we've got on offer. These are really helpful things for us to focus on when children start with us, because most of the children, with the sort of wonderful support that early years teams give them, quite quickly will feel confident and start to enjoy their learning and to take part and to make friends. But a few children won't. There'll be something that is getting in the way for them. Maybe they're not communicating well enough to manage. Maybe they find it hard to manage their feelings. Maybe we need to help them with their physical development so they can take part in a lot of the activities and use the equipment we have. So our on-entry assessment helps pick up who those children are so we can have further conversations with their parents. We can give them the intensive support they need so that very quickly they too are accessing the curriculum we have on offer and enjoying their time in the early years. In development matters in the prime areas, there are some checkpoints, but I would stress that the checkpoints are there to guide practitioners who may have a concern about a child's development. They're not there to be turned into a checklist for every child. So they're there to help us, but they're not there to become a checklist for everyone. Professional judgment is central to all of the decisions we make about assessment and tracking. Ofsted have been really clear that they won't look at in-year data when they come and inspect early years provision. So any rationale for the collection of large amounts of data being about preparing for Ofsted is no longer in line with what Ofsted themselves are saying. So we need to think about what will help our teaching and our care of the children and take a proportionate approach to the assessment we do and the data we collect. So in my role, I'm passionate about every child doing really well and identifying children who might be at risk of struggling in their learning and picking up if any groups of children might be disadvantaged. So we do collect some data about children's development using an assessment system called Early Years Toolbox. But we make that light touch, it's quick to do, and the large majority of our work is around other aspects of assessment. The types of assessment which make a difference to children's learning, principally feedback and scaffolding. So when we have that strong focus on data that we need this many observations of children a week, and we're always picking up our iPad and taking a photo of what a child has done, we're not available for the children at those times. We're not playing with them. We're not extending their vocabulary. We're not introducing them to new ideas. So it gets in the way. It's problematic. When you add all the additional workload, once the children have gone home, it becomes a problem in the early years. The new development matters takes a different approach. It's not there as a long list of all of the achievements that we want children to make, to be ticked off. It's there as guidance to help us plan our curriculum and to think about some of the key experiences and assessment points which we may choose to use. We've also deliberately blocked things to guide practitioners at different stages of working with children, birth to 3, 3s and 4s, reception year, because the previous culture where we had people doing things, including myself, like taking the 30 to 50 age band and dividing it into 3 levels, the emerging, the expected, the exceeding, that became really problematic. And no one ever answered the really simple questions, like, what's the difference between being exceeding in 30 to 50 and emerging in 40 to 60? So we had a lot of data that was essentially junk, but it took a lot of time to produce. What makes a real difference to children's learning are those minute-by-minute assessments. So, for example, when we feed back to children, when we talk to them about how well they've done something specifically, but also maybe focus on how they might have thought or done something differently, how we encourage children to talk to each other like that too. We're getting away from the well done, good boy, or the quick snap of the picture taken on the iPad. And instead, we're helping children to focus on the processes of their learning. And that helps them to become better learners. Scaffolding, where if you take helping a child put their coat on as an example, those steps all the way from maybe first of all having to do it completely for the child, through to providing a little less help. So the kind of, you put one arm in and I'll help you with the other, through to prompting children, what do you need to do next? How do you put the zip in? How do you pull the zipper up? Those scaffolding approaches to assessment in the moment really help children's learning. They help children to become more powerful learners. So that's where our efforts should be focused. And we can use these approaches to help children who may be struggling with their learning, or children with SEND in particular. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Tanya Chowdhury, who's going to talk some more about that.
Hello, my name is Tanya Chowdhury and I am the Senko here at Sheringham Nursery School. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about inclusive practice because that is something that's really central to the new EYFS. I'm going to talk through a few things and then conclude with a great video that I think will motivate us all. So the first thing that really runs through the entire document is this idea of getting to know children. So really celebrating the children for their personality, for their differences, and what, you know, they're learning, but also identifying what barriers to learning that the children might have. So moving away from this idea of levels, which is quite linear and quite rigid, but instead we're thinking about overcoming barriers. So if there's a child, for instance, who's not participating in story time, what is the child's barrier to learning? Why are they not doing so? And it's about having that conversation with the professionals, with the parents, and really understanding and unpicking that. I think it's worth highlighting that most needs are temporary, so they don't stay with the children for very long. And in fact, there's a wealth of research to suggest that actually children may have a special educational need at some point in their educational career, but not for the entirety of it. So they might have had SEN when they were younger or at some stage, but eventually with a lot of support, with the right level of support, they overcome that. And whether those needs are long-term or short-term, early identification is key. So whether it's a speech and language delay or something more complex, early identification and getting that support in place is essential and crucial. I think also reviewing your inclusive practice and thinking continuously about improvement and how you can upskill staff, how you can improve your environment, that's really important. And some of the most popular ways that we've seen in schools are through the inclusion quality mark and the inclusive classroom profile. Moving on, something that really underpins our understanding of inclusion, are the models of disability. So how do we view disability? Are we looking at it through the medical model rather, or the social model? So, really great way of explaining this is if a child turned up at school in a wheelchair and couldn't access a school, the medical model would suggest that the problem is in the child and that there should be a cure for the child. But the social model, in fact, would suggest that the school's not accessible. Why is there not a ramp? Because we are causing the barriers and the problem is not in the child. So thinking about those things and having that mindset is really important to how we view inclusion. I really like this sort of finding by Dylan Williams, where he suggests that early years teachers can generally identify which students are struggling, but they're less skilled at identifying the causes of the failure to progress. So, we're fabulous. We're great at identifying which children aren't doing as well, but actually identifying the causes and therefore encouraging the children to make progress is something that we really need to work on. The Monumental Repi project found that children who were struggling to learn weren't accessing the curriculum in the same way that highly capable learners were. So the children that were struggling to learn were getting more of the sort of personal and social education in comparison to their peers. So they weren't getting the full extent of the curriculum. And that's something really interesting to think about when we think about this idea, this notion of scaffolding up rather than differentiating down. So when we have something on offer in the curriculum, then it's really important that all of the children are able to access this, and not just children who do not have a special educational need. But in fact, as adults, as schools, we need to do as much as possible to support the children to access it with great modelling, great scaffolding, lots of prompting, and that will support children as much as possible. Now, an example of this is if, for example, one of our curricular goals is for children to make a bread roll by the time they leave nursery, a child with a special educational need, might only be able to access that activity by touching the dough. But for them, that's a great achievement because they're tactile defensive. And now it's a really huge deal that they're able to play, touch, and experience those textures. I think I want to conclude on this really fantastic video from Laurence, who is great to hear from the autistic voice itself about his experience of the early years and sort of how he felt throughout the years and the support that he got. So we'll conclude on this video.
Hi, I'm Laurence, I'm 25, currently live in Leeds, West Yorkshire, also known as God's own country. And I'm going to give a little bit of insight into the initial drive behind the support that I was given before starting primary school and how this support continued throughout my primary school years. So I started out as a very young boy in North London in Haringey, and the early signs were that I was anything but a normal child. The signs that I was quite different, and I was also showing signs of having a learning difficulty, namely Asperger's syndrome, a syndrome I'm very proud to say that I have, but of course was not going to know that I had that at the tender age of 3 years old when I joined Woodlands Park Nursery, which Julian was running at the time. So Julian picked up on this straight away. While the other kids were all kind of together in their groups, playing together, doing their thing, I couldn't handle or didn't want the social interaction at the time. I wanted my own routine, a strict one I needed to stick to, and that routine was to be by myself and to throw my shoes over the wall into the retirement home next to the nursery. Sometimes got the shoes back. One point I didn't, much to my parents' dismay. As well as this, I was obsessed with the Harry McClary books that were at the nursery, and I needed to read them every single time I was there. The same exact books, every time I was there. Julian supported me and allowed me to do this by making me read the books onto a voice recorder. That's so all the other kids would have access to the books in audio form, which would allow me to fulfill that routine I needed to stick to. So while this support was given to me at the nursery, I wasn't going to be at the nursery forever, and Julian knew this, of course, and he knew that and could see that I needed the support to continue when I was in school. So Julian fought tooth and nail and really pushed for me to have that extra support when I started school. And thanks to this, by the time I started primary school, the support was already in place. This support at primary school came in the form of two support workers called Mr. Artemis and Mrs. Nightingale. Their primary role in my classes was to basically ensure that I fully understood what was going on around me and that I fully knew what I was doing with regards to what we were learning and the tasks that we had to do, and that I wasn't just sitting there lost and confused and not doing anything or getting involved, basically. As well as this, they were also there to ensure that I actually engaged with my classmates and tried to speak to them and make friends, because as an extremely shy, introverted primary school child with Asperger's syndrome, this wasn't going to be done of my own accord. I would have been needed to be pushed to do this, and they obviously knew how crucial it would be for me going forward. A few years into primary school then, and my dad gets a job up in Leicester, so we all up and move. We leave North London and we move to a small village just outside Leicester, where I started a complete new school. As a child, that would completely flip out if my brother got to go on my PlayStation before me, which was different than normal. Moving from London to a complete different part of the country was a massive move, and my teacher, an Irish guy called Mr. Quinn, he completely understood this, and he ensured the levels of support that I received continued through so many extra efforts, such as telling me whenever there was a change in routine, something as small as we're doing English first and not maths. He would let me know before, so it wouldn't be a shock when he announced it. He also let me choose to work with my mate Joe, who I was most comfortable with in that classroom, in any group work tasks. And as well as that, at one point I remember there was this nativity play where all the parents were coming to watch, and he knew there was no way in this world I was ever going to go on stage and learn lines. So he let me and my mate Joe dress up in boiler suits, and we were the prop guys. Basically, we were walking around the school carrying chairs and tables and setting everything up. Something so small, but which would have been so important for me. In secondary school, I had some support. I had extra time in exams, which I of course used, and there was also a dedicated learning support unit where if I needed chat or any assistance or something was up, anything like that, I could go and speak to them and they would help. But in secondary school, I didn't use or need this support as well. I also didn't need any one-on-one support as I previously did, because I was becoming more and more confident, more and more sociable, a lot less shy. I was making established friendship groups and doing so many things outside of my comfort zone or just completely different, and not being fazed by that. I put this down to the initial support that I was given in primary school, acting as a foundation and building a platform for me to go on and overcome the barriers with my Asperger's syndrome and actually go on and succeed in school and do some really good things. I sit here and I feel really blessed. I have a first degree in sociology at the University of Leeds with a study abroad to Germany in there to boot, which was just the best year ever. What I'd give to go back. And I'm extremely confident. I'm not faced by social situations. Don't care about change anymore. In fact, bring it on. My next goal is to move to Asia to teach English to kids. Want the opportunity to travel, and I also want to show the same faith in kids that was shown in me, and hopefully give the same platform to another kid that was given to me. Thank you.
So if you're anything like me, quite a lot of information is coming your way, and you're already starting to think about all of the changes that you might have to make and how you're going to manage that, and maybe feeling like I would be a bit panicky. So I hope the next section will support you with working through those sorts of thoughts that you're probably having at the moment. What sort of changes should you be making? Maybe you've already got a long list of things you feel that you need to do differently, and you're wondering how you're going to manage all of that. So the first thing I'd say is that effective processes of change don't start from that place. Although myself, I know that I've been there many times. So the first thing for us to think about is, what is it we do really well in our school? We want to preserve that. We're not doing all change on the 1st of September, a kind of year zero. Secondly, let's explore what's new in the EYFS. Let's look carefully at the changes. Let's think about what we would like to do positively to keep improving the learning and the experience of the children we're working with. So on this slide, you can see an adapted version of a diagram from the Education Endowment Foundation's Putting Evidence to Work, a school's guide to implementation. And really what I've just been talking about there is what they call the explore phase. That's followed by the prepare phase. How are we actually going to implement the new framework? We're not going to do everything new all at once, but we do need a realistic plan about how we're going to put those changes into action during the year ahead. We can't change everything at the same time. What sort of professional development will we need in the prepare phase? Making sure that we block in plenty of time, both for whole team training and discussion about the EYFS changes, and also ongoing monitoring and review. And the evidence says that professional development is only effective if we think about a 6 to 12 month time span. So we're not going to do a briefing about the revised EYFS and then job done. We're going to be thinking about a 6 to 12 month plan for how we implement this. And we're not going to change everything all at the same time. And then, of course, there's the deliver and the sustain phases. So I think it's really important not to do what I feel I've frequently done as a school leader, which is to try to do far too many things too quickly. We need to do less, and we need to do it much better. And if we think about some of the impact of COVID-19, we know that that impact has been on children's early communication, for example. We know that we really need to be present with the children, not bogged down in unnecessary workload and data. We know that the poorest children and families have been hit hardest by the pandemic. So we need that focus on equalities. So the changes to the EYFS will support us in the urgent work we need to do as we help all of our children to bounce back from a very difficult time. The second thing I'd say when you're looking at making changes is have a look at the Early Years Toolkit from the Education Endowment Foundation. And that gives you a very handy guide as to what sort of changes will have the most impact if you make them in your setting. It's a really good starting point for professional conversations, because we don't want to change something for change's sake. We want to change something because that will improve children's learning. So all of that might sound fine in theory, but what's it actually going to be like in practice? In this next section of our briefing, we're going to hear from 6 of the teachers whose schools were early adopters. And these 6 teachers not only have been trailblazing the revised EYFS this year, but they've also been sharing their experience on the Early Years Early Adopter School Facebook group, where we've now got over 17,000 teachers and educators sharing freely their ideas and supporting each other around the revised EYFS. And I'd very much like to thank these 6 teachers for giving up some of their time to talk to me about their experience of the revised EYFS.
Okay, hi everyone. We're just 6 of us now. We're early adopters and we came from July. We've been on a real journey. We started with panic and confusion and a bit more, oh my gosh, where are we going to go, where are we going to start from, to now a more reflective, slower paced, more collaborative, more of a ramble rather than a journey. And I think it's taken a lot more of us to step back and go at 100 miles an hour to suddenly take a deep breath and realise it doesn't all have to be done now, and it isn't done now. And 8 months down the line, it still isn't in September. We still need to make changes. So we really, really thought the year as a great opportunity to make tweaks, make small changes, be reflective, to take on board our team with the new development matters and the statutory guidance, and take stock. We've been able to look at and audit staff development. We've been able to look at what it would be like for a child in our setting, where they start from, what it's like in our schools, what it's like in our communities, and look at the unique child, look at their strengths, look at their needs, and move them forward using the new development matters. So it's really been a real positive opportunity, we felt, along with a lot of panic. We started off with loads of questions, as I'm sure everybody is having at the moment. We started off with a panic of questions on baseline, assessment, curriculum, tracking, how we're going to get everybody on board, expectations, matching up with the Key Stage 1 curriculum. We looked at the development matters and the changes in even the document and its length and its presentation, the removal of month bands, the removal of and changes of where's this, where's that, oh gosh, this has been added, oh that's taken away, or where do we find this now? And it's taken a lot of exploration and using our team to explore it. So going with taking everybody on board and taking everybody with our ramble, Helen, we've really looked at the stakeholders, haven't we, and really tried to engage those with us right from the start. Do you want to share a little bit about how we felt that we've managed to do that so far?
Yeah, no, we found that was one of the most important things to actually start with, was bringing along our stakeholders, actually knowing what the children need to know. They're our main stakeholder, the ones that we really need to know for our cohort, but then also your staff. And I think you've got to think to yourself, are you actually the class teacher in the class trying to push this forward, or are you a member of SLT in charge of making these changes? But you have to level up and level down. You've got to work with your SLT, you've got to work with your head teacher. And I think what we found, as soon as we were getting that dripping of information and the shared videos and the shared training, making sure that everybody was able to access it so that we were all getting the same message, not that we were trying to filter it down, that the fact that actually everybody listened to the same message. And I actually think that was one of the positive things at the start, because everybody realised we were on this journey and we've got to all move together and work out how we're going to strategise and plan for this.
Absolutely. And like you said, the children, the stakeholders at the heart of it, but everybody needs to have an awareness, and it was passing that message on, wasn't it? And Sharon, I think the biggie was looking at our curriculums, and some of us now reflecting on it only need a small tweak, don't we?
Yeah, I found back in September, I was so eager to get everything sorted and I wanted everything ready straight away. So that summer holiday, I was reading through all the documents, getting things in my mind. But then with the pandemic and the children coming back, it actually slowed me down, and it actually made me take that step backwards, which was a really good thing. So what it did was make me look at what my school does well, look at what I do well, what do I like about my curriculum in the classroom, what areas I needed to feel that I needed to tweak or to look at in more depth, and to sort of maybe celebrate what was going well. For example, we did Talk for Right. Some schools might do the forestry approach, some schools might do helicopter stories. So I think that's really important, that you look at yourself straight away, what you're really proud of and your achievements, and make sure that that stays with you, and that, you know, the tweaks that you make to your curriculum are actually only small. And we found that throughout the year as well, that, you know, as we sort of gone through the curriculum and teaching with the children, there are things we thought, right, we've not got enough of this, we need to find out a bit more about it. And the group and the Facebook group has been fantastic for sharing ideas, things that other schools might have been on their journey with. And so working with others about your curriculum is really important.
As well as seeing each school as being unique as well, and what's right for one isn't best fit for the other, is it? And we found that with talking within ourselves, haven't we? We're all from very different schools and settings. I know that we had a massive panic about assessment and the assessment procedure, because, oh my gosh, it is different. And thank goodness it is. Corey, you've done a heap of work on that. So do you want to talk us through the main changes that you felt that have happened?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Everybody says, like, it's a lot of reflection. We've all been doing the job for a while now, and I think you're absolutely right. It's just, you're allowed to slow down and take your time and think about how you want to do things. It's not, you don't have to have it all perfect in September, I definitely thought that I had so many questions. I wanted it all spot on in September, and it just didn't work like that. And I think working with the team and SLT, so that SLT really understands what assessment's going to look like, because it is different, it's more valuable for a start. I personally feel that any recording that I do now is more useful and value to me to continue to challenge the children. I'll provide extra support for those who need it. That I don't do mountains of recording, because the emphasis is on reducing workload and less evidence collecting. But I also think that as we put more value on practitioner judgment and upskilling all our staff in different areas of learning or different development, I think those formative assessments that you do all the time, every day, countless times a day, in the moment with individual children or groups of children, have so much value to evaluate your provision and make sure everything's okay. And I think when the SLT come in and they understand that as well, that's incredibly important. But also, it's not all about the data in progress meetings. It's about that whole child and making sure that, you know, could be countless reasons why you think they might not be where they need to be, but it's having that time to really talk about that individual child and what they need or a group of children need. And for me, that's been a real positive and a learning curve as well. And I enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have, definitely. And it's taken a lot less time, hasn't it? Yes, and it's definitely reflecting on what assessment, what is it used for, and how is it going to be used, and who is it used for. Catherine, I know that you've got a reception and key stage a year one mixed class, and you really found the tie-in with those a positive, haven't you?
I have. I mean, I've not really been able to go into the early years curriculum as much as some of the other ladies, because I'm still sort of teaching the Key Stage 1 curriculum alongside. So my reception do sort of have to sort of fit in with the class structure that I have. But actually, I wanted to be an early adopter, because when I looked at the early learning goals in general, I just thought they fitted a lot better for the expectations of the year 1 curriculum. And I just felt that actually it was a much smoother match. It was a smoother transition. And actually just working on it this year, especially with the maths, especially with the knowledge and understanding of the world, it's just sort of lended itself a lot better to teaching the 2 different year groups. And actually the children are really thriving, they're really loving it. And I've been able to almost block science in a way and do like a whole big class science experiment, whereas before I wasn't really doing that. And I just think it strengthened all the whole school links. So probably last year we did a lot of work on progression maps right from year 1 to year 6, and early years was almost just sort of left out. Whereas now I feel like we're part of the whole school. We've got much better subject leader knowledge now, because whereas before the science subject leader might come and say, oh, well, what do you do in science? It was a bit sort of woolly, whereas now I think working on the progression maps and things that we've worked on, it's really sort of obvious now what we're expecting from the early years children and what we'd really like them to explore and do. So I think that's really helped, actually.
Absolutely. And reflecting back to what we started off with, the main stakeholder being the child. And my gosh, I think that's a major plus point that I found from this, the fact that we get to spend far more time with the children, and that's been it's been an absolute blessing. So Anna, I think you've come from a job, you've moved into early years, haven't you, and you've really found that being with the children and enjoyed that aspect, haven't you?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's been good for two reasons, really. One of them is that we need to talk more as a team, because we don't spend our time ticking copious amount of boxes to say where the children are. Nobody's expecting copious amounts of evidence from us because we are being more trusted as professionals, which then means that we can spend more time actually talking to the children and following what they want to do, and very often have a conversation at the end of the day about what different members of staff have noticed, and really make sure that we can see that whole child from different, you know, different areas of the provision, and different members of staff obviously have different relationships with the children. So that's been really nice. And the fact that, you know, if anybody comes in, a head teacher or SLT, they are not expecting to find a teacher at the table, or, you know, teaching to the class, even though we do that as well. But, you know, we are found in a mud kitchen or in the water play, and we are teaching vocabulary, we are teaching concepts, we are teaching science, we're teaching communication through playing with the children, and it's just as much value into it, if not more, than, you know, trying to collate all that evidence that we used to do in the past. So I think it's been better for the children. They get better out of us, they get more of our time and more of our attention, and that's priceless, especially in the situation that we're finding ourselves now after the lockdown. So I've absolutely loved it.
So a big thank you to the early adopters. In the final section of the briefing, I'm going to talk a little bit about Ofsted and finally some concluding thoughts. So I'm not going to speak for Ofsted here, and there are plenty of videos and other bits of information that Ofsted have put out there about the new education inspection framework, and particularly about the EYFS. So I just want to highlight a few direct quotations from Ofsted themselves. Here's from their school inspection update in January 2019. The school culture of defending and managing outcomes is extended into defending against and managing Ofsted inspections. Far too much time, work, and energy are spent on preparing everything that Ofsted might possibly expect to see. Over time, the main thrust of the typical inspection conversation has come to be about recent outcomes, assessment of current pupil progress, and expectations of future progress. Schools have responded to this with workload-intensive management models that focus on data and prediction. Perhaps most important of all, these distortions have the greatest negative effect on the pupils we should care about most, the most disadvantaged, the poor, those with special educational needs and/or disabilities, and the least able. And I hope you can see from that update from Ofsted how many of the messages that we've shared with you in this briefing are also consistent with what Ofsted are saying about inspection, what's important for Ofsted, and also what they won't be doing on inspection. Here is what Phil Minns HMI said recently about what can happen in the EYFS. And he talked about hitting the target, but missing the point. So the early learning goals are really important, and we must be ambitious for all of our children. But what we mustn't do is make the whole of the EYFS a drive towards the ELGs. That's what Phil Minns calls hitting the target, but missing the point. He talks about a child getting the GLD, but not having the real focus that they need, particularly on prime areas of learning, which are actually the things that will make the difference for them in their success later on. Their ability to have positive relationships, to feel good about themselves, to be able to start and finish an activity, to have the vocabulary and the understanding of the vocabulary that they need in their language and communication. It's important that we do what's right for the children in the early years today, but also what's right to set them up for future success in their education. And playing games with GLD targets isn't part of what's doing right for children. And I think what Phil Minns says here is a really important commentary on where we've sometimes gone wrong in the early years. Finally, there's of course lots more to discuss and to explore about the changes. And that's why I independently wrote a book called Working with the Early Years Foundation Stage, Principles into Practice. And you can download that book for free from developmentmatters.org.uk. Thank you very much for listening and watching our briefing. And all of us wish you well as you put the revised EYFS into action. Thank you.